You know those moments where you look back and wonder how everything went so wrong? That's where I am right now, sitting in my new apartment that's about half the size of our master bedroom, trying to figure out exactly when I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm Ashley, 32, and I'm about to tell you how I managed to blow up my marriage because I couldn't handle my own insecurities. I met Michael at my college roommate's wedding in Michigan 3 years ago. I wasn't even supposed to be at the main table, but another bridesmaid got food poisoning, so I got bumped up. There he was, sitting across from me in this perfectly tailored navy suit, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He wasn't like the other guys I usually went for. You know, the smooth talkers who'd sweep you off your feet and then ghost you 2 weeks later. Michael owned 2 restaurants in downtown Detroit, and unlike my ex Dylan, who always talked about the bar he was totally gonna open someday, Michael actually had his life together. He wasn't loud about it either. When people asked what he did, he'd just say he worked in restaurants. I had to hear from the bride later that he'd built both places from scratch. I'm not going to lie. After a string of relationships with guys who couldn't keep their electricity on, Michael's stability was incredibly attractive. Plus, he had this quiet confidence that made me feel safe, like when he asked for my number, he didn't play any games. He called the next day and asked me to dinner at this cute Italian place downtown. We moved pretty fast after that. I know some people thought 6 months was too soon to move in together, but when you know, right? Looking back, maybe I was a little too eager to merge our lives. I'd been working at Nordstrom for a few years, and while I was good at my job, watching Michael run his businesses made me feel, I don't know, like I'd finally found my ticket to the life I wanted. He didn't seem to mind that I had expensive taste. Actually, he thought it was cute at first how excited I'd get about my designer purchases. You work hard, you deserve nice things, he'd say. That's what I loved about him. He never made me feel bad about wanting the finer things in life, not like my ex who'd roll his eyes every time I came home with a shopping bag. We got married after a year, and it was perfect. Well, almost perfect. I'd wanted a bigger wedding, but Michael insisted on something more intimate. He said it made more sense to put the money toward a down payment on a house. That should have been my first clue that we saw money differently, but I was too caught up in the romance of it all to notice. The first year was like a dream. Michael's businesses were doing well, we bought this gorgeous colonial in a nice suburb, and I felt like I'd finally made it. No more counting days until payday or sharing a cramped apartment with roommates. I had a walk-in closet bigger than my first bedroom, and a husband who didn't flinch when I wanted to redecorate the entire first floor. But you know how they say, when something seems too good to be true, it probably is? Yeah, I started noticing little things. Like how Michael would spend hours going over the restaurant's books, but barely glanced at our joint credit card statement. Or how he'd light up talking about his plans to expand the business, but zone out when I talked about the new Gucci collection. I tried to involve myself in his work life, going to industry events and charity dinners. But standing there in my carefully chosen outfits, listening to everyone talk about profit margins and overhead costs, I felt like an outsider. These people had degrees in business and hospitality management, and there I was, the girl who dropped out of community college after 3 semesters because it was too boring. The more successful Michael became, the more I found myself shopping to feel better. A new dress for each event, shoes to match, bags that would show I belonged in his world. I opened a couple of credit cards in just my name. Not because I was hiding anything, I told myself, but because I didn't want to bother him with the details. He was busy enough. Looking back, I can see how that perfect beginning wasn't so perfect after all. But here's the thing. When you're so focused on keeping up appearances, on trying to be the person you think your husband deserves, you miss the cracks forming underneath. I was so busy trying to fit into Michael's world that I didn't realize I was slowly destroying my place in it. I just wish I'd seen then what I see now. But I guess that's getting ahead of myself. The real problems hadn't even started yet. Michael's business was about to grow even bigger, and I was about to learn just how insecure I really was. That second year of marriage was when things really started to change. Michael got this opportunity to open a third restaurant, and suddenly it was like I'd become invisible. He'd come home late, exhausted, barely touching his dinner before falling asleep on the couch. When I'd try to tell him about my day, he'd just nod along while scrolling through emails on his phone. I mean, I get it. Running restaurants is demanding. But what about running a marriage? My friend Rachel would always say how lucky I was. At least Michael's actually working, she'd tell me, not sitting at home playing video games like my ex. And yeah, I knew she was right. But she didn't have to sit alone at dinner parties, making excuses for why her husband was missing again. She didn't have to watch her friends' husbands bring them surprise lunches at work, while her own husband forgot their anniversary because he was dealing with a supplier crisis. I started spending more time at the mall during my breaks at work. There's something about buying something new that makes you feel better, you know? Like each purchase was filling this growing emptiness inside me. I'd tell myself I needed to look the part of a successful restaurant owner's wife. How would it look if I wore the same dress twice to his business dinners? The credit card bills were getting scary, but I kept telling myself it was temporary. Once Michael's new restaurant was up and running, things would go back to normal. He'd start paying attention to me again, and we'd laugh about how tough this period was. Besides, his business was doing well. We could afford it. At least, that's what I told myself every time I raised the limit on my secret cards. It didn't help that everyone kept talking about how amazing Michael was doing. Your husband is such a genius with restaurants, they'd say, or you must be so proud of his success. And I was proud, really. But would it kill them to ask about my life sometimes? It's like I'd become Michael's wife instead of Ashley. I tried talking to him about it once. I waited until he was actually home for dinner, made his favorite meal, and tried to explain how lonely I felt. You know what he said? Maybe you should think about going back to school. Find something you're passionate about. Like my feelings weren't valid unless I was as ambitious as him. Like being good at my job and wanting my husband's attention wasn't enough. That's when I started noticing how different we were. Michael got excited about spreadsheets and profit margins. Me? I got excited about the new seasonal collections at work and planning dinner parties he'd probably miss. He'd wake up at 5 a.m. to meet with suppliers, while I'd stay up late watching reality TV because at least those couples spent time together. The worst part was seeing my friends' marriages and wondering where we went wrong. Rachel's husband might not own his own business, but he was there for Taco Tuesdays and weekend brunches. Even my younger sister's boyfriend, who worked as a mechanic, managed to take her on regular dates. Meanwhile, I was lucky if Michael made it home in time to say goodnight. I started dressing up more when I'd visit him at the restaurants, hoping he'd notice. New outfit, perfect makeup, the works. But he'd just give me a distracted kiss and go back to whatever crisis needed his attention. The only time he really seemed to notice what I was wearing was when the credit card statement came. And even then, he was too busy to do more than raise an eyebrow and mutter something about discussing it later. Later never came, of course. He was too busy with vendor meetings, staff training, menu planning. There was always something more important than me. I started wondering if maybe I wasn't successful enough for him anymore. Like maybe he regretted marrying someone who folded sweaters for a living while he was out there building an empire. Looking back, I can see I was drowning in my own insecurities. But at the time, all I could focus on was this growing distance between us. And then he hired Emma, and everything I'd been pushing down, all those fears and doubts, they all came bubbling to the surface in the worst possible way. Emma. Even saying her name now makes my stomach tight. She walked into our lives with her perfectly pressed blazers and her MBA from Michigan State, and suddenly Michael had all the time in the world for business meetings. I still remember the first time I met her at the restaurant's staff party. She was younger than me, maybe 28, with this no-nonsense attitude and not a hair out of place. No designer labels, just clean-cut professional clothes that probably came from Express or whatever. The way Michael introduced her made my skin crawl. "Emma's going to revolutionize how we run things," he said, beaming like a proud parent. She has amazing ideas for expansion. I stood there in my new Louboutins that had maxed out my Nordstrom card, feeling like a little girl playing dress-up. At first, I tried to be friendly. I'd stop by the restaurant with lunch for Michael, only to find them huddled over laptops, speaking this secret language of profit margins and market analysis. Emma would always be so polite, so professional, calling me Mrs. Anderson, even after I told her to call me Ashley. Looking back, maybe her politeness made it worse. Like she was this perfect employee, while I was just the wife who didn't understand my husband's world. I started noticing things, little things. How Michael's face would light up when she presented new ideas in meetings. How he'd mention her name at dinner. Emma thinks this, Emma suggested that. How he'd never miss a meeting if she was running it. But he'd been too busy to make my nephew's birthday party the weekend before. The texts started getting to me. They were always about work, but they'd come at all hours. Great meeting today at 10 p.m. Excited about tomorrow's presentation at 6 a.m. I started checking his phone while he slept. I'm not proud of it, but tell me you wouldn't do the same. The messages were all professional, but there was this energy to them. This enthusiasm that Michael didn't have for anything else anymore, especially not for me. One night, I overheard him on the phone with her, laughing about some inside joke about their supplier's terrible 2p. When was the last time he'd laughed like that with me? I couldn't remember. I started comparing myself to her constantly. She had a degree in business, I had an unfinished associate's degree. She could talk about wine pairings and food costs. I still got confused about which wine glass was for red and which was for white. She helped him build his dream. I just spent his money. Rachel tried to be supportive, but I could tell she thought I was being paranoid. They work together, Ashley. Of course they talk a lot. But she didn't see how he looked at Emma during staff meetings, like she was the only person in the room who spoke his language. She didn't notice how Emma always seemed to know what Michael needed before he asked, whether it was a spreadsheet or his preferred coffee order. I started driving by the restaurants at random times, just to check in. I'd tell myself I was being a supportive wife, but really, I was looking for proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that there was something going on. I'd sit in my car watching them through the windows, working late into the night. Nothing inappropriate ever happened, but that almost made it worse. The intimacy was there in every shared laugh, every animated conversation, every excited gesture over some document I probably wouldn't understand. Then came the text about the surprise. I saw it pop up on his phone one morning while he was in the shower. Everything's set for the surprise next week. Can't wait to see your face. From Emma, of course. My hands shook as I read it, my mind spinning with possibilities. A private dinner? A secret rendezvous? It didn't matter, that part of me knew I was being irrational. All I could think about was them, together, sharing something that didn't include me. That was when I started planning how I'd confront them. I couldn't take it anymore. The late nights, the secret texts, the way they seemed to share this whole world that I wasn't part of. I didn't have proof, exactly, but I had something better. I had my certainty. And I was about to blow their whole world apart, even if it meant destroying mine in the process. I picked a Tuesday night to do it. Michael's main restaurant was always packed on Tuesdays, some weekly special they ran that Emma had apparently suggested. I got dressed like I was going into battle. My tightest black dress, highest heels, full makeup. I even put on the expensive perfume Michael had given me last Christmas, though he probably didn't even remember buying it. Rachel tried to talk me out of it. Ashley, think about what you're doing, she kept saying. But what was there to think about? I had proof, well, sort of. I had the text about the surprise, the late-night meetings, the way he'd changed his phone password last month. It all added up if you looked at it right. I waited until I knew they'd be in the middle of dinner service. I wanted witnesses. I wanted everyone to see who Emma really was. This homewrecker in sensible shoes who thought she could steal my husband. I walked into that restaurant like I owned it. Which, technically, I kind of did, being his wife and all. And there they were, in his office, door wide open, heads bent over some paperwork. Emma was pointing at something on the desk, and Michael was nodding, that familiar excited look on his face that used to be reserved for me. They didn't even notice me at first, too caught up in whatever fascinating spreadsheet they were reviewing. So this is the surprise, huh? My voice came out shakier than I'd planned. They both looked up, startled. The secret meetings, the late-night texts, the constant work discussions. Michael stood up slowly, like he was approaching a wild animal. Ashley, what are you talking about? Don't play dumb with me, Michael. I saw the text about the surprise. I know what's been going on. Emma started gathering her papers, her face flushing. Mrs. Anderson, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Don't you Mrs. Anderson me? I was shouting now, all my carefully planned accusations coming out in a jumble. I've seen how you look at him, how you're always there, always so perfect and professional and understanding. Ashley, stop. Michael's voice had that warning tone, the one he used when I'd overspent on the credit card. You're embarrassing yourself. That's when I lost it completely. I'm embarrassing myself? What about you? Sneaking around with your little business prodigy while your wife sits at home alone. At least have the decency to admit it. Emma stepped forward, her hands raised like she was surrendering. The surprise is the new restaurant location, Mrs. Anderson. We're opening a 4th location, and we've been keeping it quiet because we're still in negotiations. Michael wanted to surprise you with the news at the investor dinner next week. I remember how the room seemed to tilt sideways. What? She's engaged, Ashley. Michael's voice was quiet, disappointed. To her girlfriend Sarah, who you've met twice. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear dishes clattering in the kitchen, conversations from the dining room, the whole restaurant continuing to function while my world imploded. Emma's face was a mixture of pity and embarrassment that made me want to crawl under the desk and disappear. I think, Michael said, still in that terribly quiet voice, that you should go home. We'll talk about this later. I've seen your texts. I tried one last time, but even I could hear how weak it sounded. The late nights, the meetings, those texts you saw by going through my phone while I slept, his eyes were cold now. The meetings you know about because you've been tracking my location. Emma quietly slipped out of the office, leaving us alone with the wreckage of what I'd done. The truth hit me then. Not just about how wrong I'd been about them, but about how I'd been slowly destroying my marriage with my own insecurities and suspicions. Michael, I started, but he held up his hand. Not here. Not now. I can't even look at you right now. I drove home in a daze. My perfect confrontation turned into a perfect nightmare. But you want to know the worst part? Even then, some tiny twisted part of me still wanted to blame them for making me feel so insecure in the first place. If only Michael hadn't been so distant. If only Emma hadn't been so perfect. If only. Michael didn't come home that night, or the next. On the 3rd day, he showed up with boxes and a blank expression I'd never seen before. He didn't yell. Somehow, that was worse. He just started packing his things while I followed him around the house, trying to explain, to apologize, to make him understand how everything had looked from my perspective. I found the credit card statements, he said finally, not even looking at me as he folded his shirts into a suitcase. All of them. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? He pulled out a folder, organized and labeled because of course it was, and dropped it on the bed. 4 secret credit cards, Ashley. $43,000 in debt that you never told me about. And you have the nerve to accuse me of being dishonest? I tried to explain about the pressure I felt, about needing to look the part of a successful restaurant owner's wife, but the words sounded hollow even to me. He just kept packing, methodically, like he was closing down one of his restaurants for the night. The apartment's paid through the end of the month, he said, zipping up his suitcase. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the rest. That's when reality hit me. Wait, what? What apartment? The one you'll be moving into. I'm keeping the house. It's in my name, and I can prove I made all the payments. You should be grateful I'm covering first and last month's rent somewhere else. He was right, of course, about all of it. The house was his. The life I'd been living was built on his success and my lies. But that didn't stop me from feeling like I was the victim somehow. I mean, if he'd been more attentive, would I have needed to shop to feel better? If he hadn't worked so much, would I have gotten so paranoid? Rachel stopped answering my calls after that. Turns out she and her husband had been at the restaurant that night, had seen the whole thing. "You need help, Ashley," she texted me. "Professional help." Like she'd never gotten jealous in her life. Like she'd never felt insecure. Easy for her to judge, her husband was always there, always present. She didn't know what it was like to compete with someone like Emma. Moving into the apartment was a wake-up call I wasn't ready for. Gone was my walk-in closet, replaced by a tiny space that couldn't fit half my designer wardrobe. No more luxury kitchen with the expensive coffee maker Michael had imported from Italy. No more guest room for my sister to stay in when she visited. Just a one-bedroom walk-up that screamed starting over in the worst possible way. The first time I tried to use my credit card at Nordstrom after moving out, it was declined. All of them were. Michael had called the companies, explained about the separation. Apparently, when you open credit cards using your husband's income without his knowledge, they take a pretty dim view of that. Who knew? I had to get a second job at a coffee shop just to make minimum payments on my cards. Do you know how humiliating it is to serve lattes to people wearing the kind of clothes you used to own? To see them check their designer watches while waiting for their orders, knowing you had to sell yours to make rent? Emma got promoted to regional manager for all of Michael's restaurants. I found out through a mutual friend who didn't know they weren't supposed to talk to me anymore. The fourth location, the surprise that had started this whole mess, opened to rave reviews. Meanwhile, I was living on ramen and store-brand coffee, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. My mom says I should have seen it coming. You can't build a life on appearances. She told me during one of her lectures about responsibility and living within my means. Easy for her to say. She's been wearing the same sensible shoes from Payless for the last decade. She doesn't understand what it's like to feel like you're not enough. To need those material things to feel worthy. The worst part? Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I catch myself wondering if I did this on purpose. Like maybe some part of me knew the marriage was falling apart anyway, and it was easier to blow it up spectacularly than to admit I wasn't cut out for Michael's world. But that's the kind of thought you push away in the morning when you have to get up and face another day of consequences. It's been 6 months now. 6 months of trying to date guys who don't measure up to Michael. 6 months of watching his restaurants thrive without me. 6 months of learning to live with being the villain in everyone else's story. I tried dating this guy from the coffee shop where I work, Trevor. He was sweet, always bringing me little treats from the bakery next door, telling me I was beautiful even in my polyester work uniform. But he lived with 2 roommates and drove a beat-up Honda, and I couldn't help comparing him to Michael. How pathetic is that? I'm the one who messed everything up, and I still think I deserve better than a barista with student loans. Last week, I drove by the main restaurant. I tell myself it's because it's on my way to the grocery store, but that's a lie. I go out of my way to pass by there. Emma's car was in the parking lot, that sensible Subaru that probably gets great gas mileage. I sat there for almost an hour, watching people go in and out, remembering when I used to be part of that world. Michael's doing great, by the way. Not that I'm stalking him or anything, but you hear things, you know? The fourth location is already turning a profit. Emma's girlfriend, now wife, does their social media marketing, and they're talking about expanding to Ann Arbor. Meanwhile, I'm still paying off those credit cards, one minimum payment at a time. My therapist, I finally started seeing one, but only because the court mandated it after Michael's lawyer brought up the stalking, says I need to own my choices. Like it's that simple. She wants me to make lists of my destructive behaviors and negative thought patterns. As if writing down compulsive shopping and paranoid tendencies is going to magically fix everything. The thing is, I do miss him. Not just the lifestyle, though God knows I miss that too. But the way he used to look at me before everything went wrong, before Emma, before the debt, before I turned into this crazy person who tracked his phone and read his texts. Sometimes I wonder if he misses me too, but then I remember the look on his face that night at the restaurant, and I know better. My sister says I should write him a letter, apologizing for everything. It might help you move on, she says. But what would I even say? Sorry I accused you of cheating. Sorry I maxed out secret credit cards. Sorry I couldn't handle feeling like I wasn't good enough for your world. It all sounds so small now, so petty. The dating apps are a joke. Every time I match with someone, I find myself scrolling through their profile, looking for red flags. Does he have a good job? Nice car? His own place? It's like I learned nothing. I'm still trying to shop for the perfect life, only now I'm shopping for men instead of handbags. My new apartment doesn't feel like home. I've tried to make it cute, bought some fake plants from Target, hung up some art prints, but everything in here reminds me of what I lost. The tiny closet that barely fits my remaining designer clothes. The kitchenette where I can't host dinner parties. The view of the parking lot instead of our beautiful backyard. You want to know the really messed up part? Sometimes I still think it was partly his fault. If he hadn't been so wrapped up in his restaurants, if he hadn't hired Emma, if he had just paid more attention to me. But that's the thing about marriage. It's not just about attention or time or money. It's about trust. And I broke that long before I burst into his restaurant that night. People keep telling me this is a learning experience, a chance to grow as a person. But what if I don't want to grow? What if I just want my old life back? What if I'm not cut out for this whole self-improvement journey everyone seems to think I need? I saw Rachel at the grocery store the other day. She pretended not to see me, turning down another aisle with her cart full of organic vegetables and wine. I wanted to run after her, to explain that I'm not the crazy person she thinks I am. But maybe I am. Maybe I'm exactly who everyone thinks I am. The jealous wife who blew up her marriage because she couldn't handle her own insecurities. So here I am, telling this story to whoever will listen, still not sure if I'm the villain or the victim. Maybe I'm both. Maybe that's what happens when you let your insecurities drive you to destroy the best thing in your life. You end up alone in a small apartment, working 2 jobs to pay off designer clothes you never should have bought, wondering if you'll ever find someone who makes you feel as safe as Michael did, before you made him feel unsafe with you.